My boyfriend told me to shut up, and he's never regretted anything more. My boyfriend, Felipe, had been making little comments about my talking for months, saying I could bore anyone to death or asking if I ever ran out of things to say. I told myself it was just him joking. But one night at his best friend's party, I was telling her about my promotion, and he said, "Jesus Christ, would you just shut the F up for once in your life?" He said it loud enough for the whole party to hear. Nobody cares about your boring job, and you sound desperate for attention. Everyone went dead silent while my face burned. And Felipe just laughed and said this was what he dealt with every day. I didn't say another word the rest of the night, and Felipe was loving it on the drive home, cranking up the music and going on about how peaceful everything was without my yapping. When I stayed quiet through Sunday breakfast, too, he literally kissed my forehead and said we should do this more often. I didn't talk the rest of Sunday, which he seemed to love. But then Monday morning, he missed his huge presentation because I didn't remind him to set his alarm like I always did. He woke up 2 hours late, losing his mind about why I didn't wake him. I just stared at him while he ran around like a headless chicken trying to find his laptop and his good tie. His boss called to tell him not to bother coming in at all. And Felipe spent the whole night raging about almost getting fired while I sat there silent, making him even madder. "This is your fault," he kept saying. But I just looked at him with dead eyes and said nothing. Then he completely forgot his mom's 60th birthday dinner because I usually handle all family stuff for him. She left 6 sobbing voicemails that I obviously didn't mention, each one more hysterical than the last. And by the time he checked his phone, she was convinced he hated her. He called me a psycho for taking this so far. But honestly, his tantrum just made me more committed to never speaking to him again. His mom called his sister crying about how her only son had abandoned her. And suddenly, the whole family was involved in the drama. Everything snowballed from there because his coworker had stopped by our apartment Tuesday when he wasn't home. And I just stood there mute while she asked if I was okay for like 10 minutes straight. She kept asking if Felipe hurt me, if I needed help, if I could blink twice for yes. And I just stared at her until she left looking terrified. She went back to the office convinced Felipe was abusing me, and suddenly he was getting called into meetings about domestic violence resources and mandatory counseling. His boss literally asked if they needed to do a welfare check on me, and Felipe had to explain that I was giving him the silent treatment, which made him sound even more like an abuser. Friday's company gala was absolutely beautiful to watch unfold. Every executive who tried talking to me got complete silence while Felipe scrambled to explain I was just shy, which nobody bought because I'd been chatty at last year's event. The CEO's wife cornered me in the bathroom trying to slip me women's shelter pamphlets. And when I wouldn't respond, she called security to make sure Felipe wasn't holding me hostage or something. HR put him on immediate leave before we even made it to the parking lot, saying they needed to investigate the concerning reports about his home situation. Saturday, his friends came over for game night and finally understood why everyone was worried. "What the hell did you do to her?" his best friend asked after I served snacks without saying a word. Felipe actually admitted what he'd said, and you could feel the temperature drop. They all left making excuses about early mornings and forgotten commitments, and his best friend told me I deserved better on his way out, which made Felipe throw a beer bottle at the wall after they were gone. By Sunday, Felipe was coming apart at the seams because his sister was threatening to call the cops. His mom had disowned him, and his job was investigating him for abuse. "Just say something," he screamed, following me around the house. "One word and this nightmare ends." But I walked past him toward the garage to grab orange juice from the spare fridge, still not making a sound even when he grabbed my arm, trying to stop me. The garage was a death trap of crap from the previous owners. Paint cans from the 80s, boxes of rusted tools, old chemicals, all piled on these rickety metal shelves that looked like they'd collapse if you breathed on them wrong. He followed me in there, still screaming about how I was destroying his life, when he positioned himself right under the worst shelf, loaded with ancient paint cans that had to weigh a ton. He was gesturing so hard the whole thing started shaking. And I watched the rusty bracket bend under 200 pounds of toxic chemicals. "You know what? You're right. I don't want your voice back. I don't even want you anymore, he yelled. You were getting fat anyway. Now at least you're fat and quiet. The shelf made this horrible groaning sound and started tipping forward. All those cans sliding toward the edge while Felipe kept ranting about how much better his life was now. The bracket snapped completely, and everything started falling toward his skull. I jumped back as 20 paint cans crashed down where Felipe stood. He tried to dodge but wasn't fast enough. A heavy can caught his shoulder and sent him sprawling onto the concrete floor. More cans bounced off his back and legs while he screamed and covered his head with his arms. One can split open, and thick paint splattered across the garage floor. Felipe rolled away from the mess, clutching his temple where a sharp edge had caught him. Blood ran down the side of his face and dripped onto his shirt. He was yelling about his head hurting while I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were steady as I dialed 911 and held the phone to my ear. The dispatcher answered asking what my emergency was, but I didn't say anything. I just held the line open while Felipe moaned and cursed in the background. The dispatcher kept asking if anyone could hear her, saying she was tracing the call. Felipe saw me holding the phone and started screaming that I did this on purpose. He said I knew the shelf would fall and I tried to kill him. His accusations got wilder as more blood ran down his face. The dispatcher said units were on the way and to stay on the line. 8 minutes later, I heard sirens getting closer. The paramedics rushed into the garage and found Felipe sitting against the wall holding his bleeding head. They immediately started checking him while asking what happened. I stood there watching without saying a word. One paramedic shined a light in Felipe's eyes, checking for concussion signs. The other one noticed the collapsed shelf and toxic chemicals spilling everywhere. She called for hazmat backup on her radio. Felipe kept ranting that I set him up, but the paramedics were focused on his injuries. They loaded him onto a gurney while he kept accusing me of attempted murder. The hazmat team arrived and started containing the spill while we headed to the hospital. I followed the ambulance in my car. At the emergency room, they took Felipe straight back for treatment. I sat in the waiting room filling out his insurance paperwork. An hour later, a police officer walked in and introduced himself as Nicholas McCarty. He said the paramedics reported this as a suspicious accident and he needed statements. He asked me direct questions about what happened in the garage. I finally broke my silence with just the basic facts. Old shelf. Felipe was yelling. It fell. I kept my answers short and didn't mention our relationship problems or the past week of silence. Officer McCarty took notes and asked if Felipe had grabbed me or hurt me physically. I showed him the bruises on my arm from where Felipe grabbed me earlier. He took photos and wrote more notes. Felipe's sister burst through the emergency room doors looking furious. She spotted me and started screaming that I tried to murder her brother. She said everyone knew I was crazy and this proved it. Security had to physically escort her to a different waiting area while she kept yelling threats. Officer McCarty watched the whole thing and made more notes in his notebook. The doctor came out and told us Felipe needed 12 stitches for the head wound. He had a concussion and needed overnight observation but should fully recover. Felipe was demanding I be arrested when Officer McCarty went to take his statement. I could hear him through the curtain saying I planned the whole thing. Officer McCarty came back and said there was no evidence of criminal intent. The shelf was old and badly installed, just an unfortunate accident with deteriorated equipment. Felipe kept screaming from his bed that I was getting away with attempted murder. I left the hospital without visiting Felipe's room. Walking to my car, my hands started shaking for the first time all night. I sat in the driver's seat, realizing I couldn't go home. Felipe would be released tomorrow, and going back to that apartment wasn't safe anymore. I needed somewhere else to stay tonight. I pulled out my phone and texted Audrey Graham, asking if I could crash at her place for a few nights. My phone rang within seconds and Audrey was already talking before I could say hello. She'd heard about Felipe's party meltdown through mutual friends and said I could stay as long as I needed. I drove straight to the apartment while Felipe was still stuck in the hospital for observation. The place felt wrong without him there, but I grabbed a duffel bag and started throwing clothes inside. I packed my laptop, birth certificate, passport, social security card, and the emergency cash I kept hidden in an old tampon box. My hands moved fast, pulling underwear and work clothes from drawers while trying not to think about what I was doing. The whole packing took maybe 15 minutes before I zipped the bag and headed for the door. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from someone named Chuck Hernandez, who said he was the property manager. He was calling about the hazmat team that showed up at our garage and needed to document everything for insurance. He mentioned the shelving was installed by previous tenants in the 90s and was a major code violation that should have been fixed years ago. I saved the message and drove to Audrey's place on the other side of town. She met me at the door and helped carry my bag to her spare room without asking questions. The room was small with just a twin bed and an old dresser, but it felt safer than anywhere else right now. Audrey sat on the bed and laid out the ground rules while I unpacked my few things. She could help me look for my own place, and I was welcome to stay, but this was temporary support, not a permanent solution. I nodded and thanked her for letting me crash there, even for a little while. That night, I barely slept thinking about everything that had happened over the past week. The next morning, my phone rang, and Officer McCarty was asking follow-up questions about the incident. He wanted to know more about the bruising on my arm from where Felipe had grabbed me in the garage. He said it could be relevant to a domestic violence investigation if I wanted to pursue that route. I told him I'd think about it and hung up feeling sick to my stomach. I found a notebook in Audrey's kitchen drawer and started writing down everything that had happened. The party humiliation went at the top, followed by my silent treatment and Felipe missing his presentation. Then his mom's birthday disaster and his coworker thinking he was abusing me and the company gala mess. Seeing it all written out in order made the pattern crystal clear in a way it hadn't been before. Felipe had been getting worse and worse, and I'd just been taking it until I finally snapped. My phone rang again, and this time it was someone named Allison Sellers from HR at Felipe's company. She needed my side of what happened at the gala and with his recent workplace behavior. She promised the conversation would stay confidential and wouldn't affect any legal stuff that might happen. I gave her the basic facts about the party and the silent treatment and how people had gotten worried. She took notes and said she'd be in touch if she needed anything else for their investigation. Later that afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number that turned out to be Felipe. He'd been discharged from the hospital and was already sending me messages that jumped between calling me names and begging for forgiveness. One text said I was a psycho who tried to kill him, and the next said he loved me and couldn't live without me. I screenshotted every single message without responding and started a new folder on my phone just for his texts. Chuck Hernandez emailed me an official report about the garage shelving that afternoon. The document stated the shelves were installed by previous tenants in 1993 without any permits or safety inspections. This meant I had zero liability for what happened, which felt like one small weight off my shoulders. I forwarded the report to Officer McCarty in case it mattered for anything legal down the road. Felipe kept texting throughout the day, and each message got more desperate or more angry than the last. He said I'd ruined his life and then begged me to come home so we could work things out. He threatened to come find me and then promised he'd go to therapy if I'd just talked to him. Every text got screenshotted and added to my growing collection of evidence about his behavior. That evening, my phone showed a voicemail from Felipe's mom, and my stomach dropped. Her voice was shaky, and she kept stopping to cry while she talked. She didn't understand what was happening between us, but begged me to please talk to her son. She said he was falling apart and needed me to help him get better. She mentioned how much she'd always loved me like a daughter and how this was breaking her heart. I saved the message but didn't call her back because any contact would just make everything worse. Felipe would use his mom to manipulate me if I gave him any opening at all. I knew his patterns too well after 3 years together to fall for that trick. Audrey found me staring at my phone the next morning and sat down across from me with her coffee, watching me for a long moment before asking if I was doing the silent treatment thing for revenge or because I was actually protecting myself. The question hit me harder than I expected, and I had to really think about what I wanted from all this mess with Felipe. I started to answer but realized I didn't actually know anymore because what started as anger had turned into something else entirely. She waited while I thought about it, and finally, I told her maybe it was both. But now I just wanted to be safe and move forward. She nodded and squeezed my hand before heading to work, leaving me to figure out my next steps. Around noon, Allison Sellers called to schedule our formal interview, and I met her at a coffee shop near Felipe's office that afternoon. She had a notebook and recorded our conversation while I went through everything that happened at the party, how his coworker had gotten worried when I wouldn't talk, and the whole disaster at the company gala. I stuck to just facts without adding my opinions or feelings about any of it. She wrote down every detail about the CEO's wife trying to give me shelter pamphlets and security getting involved and HR putting Felipe on leave right there in the parking lot. She asked a few follow-up questions about previous incidents, and I mentioned some of the comments Felipe had been making for months about my talking too much. When we finished, she said they took these situations very seriously and would be conducting a thorough investigation. The next day, Officer McCarty called to check in and mentioned I should think about getting a protective order given Felipe's physical grabbing and all the threatening texts. He explained the process was pretty straightforward since I had documentation of everything, including the bruises on my arm from where Felipe grabbed me in the garage. He emailed me the forms and contact info for the courthouse self-help desk where someone could walk me through filing. I printed everything out and started filling in the paperwork, my hands shaking a little as I wrote down all the incidents. 2 days later, I needed to get more of my stuff from the apartment, and Officer McCarty arranged for a patrol car to be there while Felipe was at work. The officer waited in his car while I went inside and grabbed clothes, my laptop charger, some important papers, and a few personal items I couldn't replace. The apartment felt weird and empty, even though all Felipe's stuff was still there. I tried not to look at our photos on the walls or think about the 3 years we'd lived there together. I packed everything into garbage bags as fast as I could and practically ran back to the patrol car. That evening, Audrey came home with news she'd heard from a mutual friend who still worked at Felipe's company. Felipe was officially on investigatory leave pending the HR review, which meant he wasn't allowed in the office or to contact any coworkers. Part of me felt good that there were finally consequences for his behavior, but another part worried he'd blame me for ruining his career and do something stupid. My phone started buzzing with texts from Felipe's sister calling me every name in the book and demanding I drop any charges and fix the mess I'd created. She said I was destroying their family and that Felipe didn't deserve this over one little comment at a party. Each message got nastier and more threatening until she was saying she'd make sure everyone knew what a psycho I was. I screenshotted every single text and forwarded them to Officer McCarty, who said he'd add them to my file and might need to have a conversation with her about harassment. The next morning, a friend from book club sent me screenshots from a group chat I didn't even know existed, where Felipe had been making fun of me for months. The messages went back to last year with him calling me annoying, saying I never shut up, joking about how he wanted to tape my mouth shut. Other guys in the chat laughed and encouraged him, sharing their own stories about their nagging girlfriends. One message from 2 months ago said he was planning to put me in my place soon, and the others had cheered him on. Reading through all of it made me realize this wasn't some sudden outburst at the party, but something he'd been building up to for a long time. I saved every screenshot and added them to my growing folder of evidence, feeling sick that I'd been living with someone who talked about me like that behind my back. Audrey helped me look at apartment listings that afternoon, focusing on buildings with security doors and month-to-month leases since I wasn't ready for anything long-term. We drove around looking at 3 different places, and I liked a small studio in a secure building with cameras and a doorman. The landlord said I could move in next week if my application got approved. That night, Felipe's mom sent a long text saying she understood if I needed space, but hoped we could all work things out and be a family again someday. She said she'd always thought of me as the daughter she never had and this whole situation was breaking her heart. She didn't mention Felipe's behavior at all, just kept saying how much she missed me and wanted us all to reconcile. Her message was sweet but showed she had no idea how serious this was or what her son had really done. I didn't respond but saved the message with all the others. After thinking about it all night, I decided to send Felipe one text, setting clear boundaries about communication going forward. I typed out that all contact needed to go through lawyers only, and he wasn't to reach out to me directly or through other people anymore. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing like crazy with texts from Felipe calling me every name in the book. He went from saying I was a cold-hearted witch to begging me to talk to him to threatening to show up at Audrey's place. Each message got screenshotted and sent straight to Officer McCarty, who added them to my file. The next morning, Allison Sellers called to say she'd been interviewing people from the gala all week. 3 executives confirmed Felipe had been grabbing my arm and getting aggressive while I stayed completely silent. The CEO's wife told Allison she'd been so worried about me, she almost called 911 from the bathroom. 2 servers remembered Felipe yelling at me in the coat check area when we were leaving. Allison said the pattern was clear and the HR case was getting stronger with each interview. That same afternoon, Chuck Hernandez emailed me an official report about the garage shelving. He'd gone through old inspection records and found that the previous tenants installed those shelves in 1994 without any permits. The brackets were never rated for that much weight, and the whole setup violated multiple safety codes. He sent copies to the insurance company and said, "This protected me from any liability if Felipe tried to sue me about his injuries." His report specifically stated the shelving was a pre-existing hazard that should have been removed years ago. Felipe kept texting me all day, even though I told him not to contact me. He'd send 5 angry messages calling me names, then switched to apologizing and saying he loved me. Then back to threats about ruining my life and telling everyone what a psycho I was. By midnight, I had 47 messages from him. Each one forwarded to Officer McCarty. The next morning, I drove to the courthouse to learn about getting a protective order. The clerk at the self-help desk was really patient and walked me through all the forms. She explained I'd need to show evidence of threats or violence and that the judge would look at patterns of escalating behavior. She gave me a packet with examples of what counts as harassment and abuse. I spent 2 hours there taking notes and making sure I understood everything. That afternoon, Officer McCarty stopped by Audrey's place with a thick folder of resources. He sat at the kitchen table and went through domestic violence warning signs with me. He pointed out how Felipe's behavior matched the escalation patterns he'd seen in hundreds of cases. The grabbing, the public humiliation, the threats, the attempts to isolate me from friends, it all followed a predictable pattern. He left me with phone numbers for support groups and safety planning worksheets. The next day, I went to the bank and opened my own checking account for the first time in 3 years. The banker helped me set up direct deposit for my paycheck and showed me how to transfer money from our joint account. I moved half the money to my new account and started canceling all the subscriptions we shared. Netflix, Spotify, the gym membership, everything got separated. Each cancellation felt like cutting another tie to Felipe. I changed all my passwords, too, and removed him from my emergency contacts at work. Meanwhile, Allison was interviewing Felipe's coworkers about his behavior at the office. 4 people reported he'd been having angry outbursts and slamming doors all week. One coworker said Felipe threw his keyboard across the room after getting an email. Another mentioned Felipe had been ranting about me to anyone who would listen. The receptionist told Allison she was scared to be alone with him after witnessing his mood swings. 2 days later, I went back to the courthouse with my folder of evidence to file for a protective order. My hands shook as I filled out form after form describing Felipe's behavior. I attached the timeline I'd written, all the screenshot texts, Officer McCarty's reports, and the photos of my bruised arm. The clerk reviewed everything and said it looked complete. She took me to a small room where I waited for the judge to review my petition. After 30 minutes, the clerk came back and said the temporary order was approved. The judge had read about Felipe grabbing me and saw the threatening messages. She scheduled a hearing in 2 weeks for a longer-term order, but the temporary one started immediately. Felipe couldn't contact me or come within 500 feet of me or Audrey's apartment. The clerk gave me 3 certified copies and explained one would be served to Felipe by the sheriff's department. They served Felipe the protective order at his office the next afternoon in front of everyone. Within an hour, Audrey started getting screenshots from mutual friends showing Felipe's meltdown on social media. He was posting about how I destroyed his life and turned everyone against him over nothing. He called me a manipulative liar and said I was using the system to get revenge. Most people weren't responding, but a few of his buddies were agreeing with him. Audrey showed me one post where Felipe was trying to organize people to testify against me at the hearing. Nobody was volunteering, and most of the comments were telling him to get help or stop posting about it. His sister commented that he needed to take responsibility for his actions, and his mom just posted a crying emoji. 3 days later, Allison called me while I was eating cereal at Audrey's kitchen table. She said HR had finished their investigation and found Felipe broke multiple company rules about workplace behavior. They were looking at everything from required anger management classes to maybe firing him completely. Her voice was careful and professional, but I could hear papers shuffling in the background. She asked if I had any questions, but I just thanked her and hung up. That same afternoon, Audrey drove me around to look at apartments since I couldn't stay on her couch forever. The first 2 places were gross with water stains on the ceilings and weird smells in the hallways. The third one was a tiny studio above a bakery that smelled like fresh bread every morning. The landlord was this older woman who took one look at me and said she understood starting over. She offered a month-to-month lease, which meant I could leave whenever I wanted without being stuck. I filled out the application right there using Audrey's address as my current residence. 2 days before the protective order hearing, I spread everything out on Audrey's dining room table. I had printed every text message and organized them by date with little sticky tabs marking the worst ones. The photos of my bruised arm went in a clear plastic sleeve along with Officer McCarty's reports. I made a timeline on index cards showing how things got worse each day of my silence. Everything went into a binder with labeled sections so I could find stuff quickly in court. My hand stayed steady as I punched holes in each paper and clicked them into place. The morning of the hearing, I put on my only business outfit and drove to the courthouse alone. Felipe was already there with some lawyer in a cheap suit who kept whispering in his ear. When my name got called, I walked to the front carrying my binder and sat at the table the clerk pointed to. The judge was an older woman with reading glasses on a chain who looked tired already at 9 in the morning. She asked me to explain why I needed the protective order extended, and I kept my voice flat and calm. I told her about the party and the silent treatment and how Felipe grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. I showed her the photos and the text messages where he called me names and threatened me. Felipe's lawyer jumped up saying I was making everything up to ruin Felipe's life out of spite. The judge told him to sit down and asked Felipe directly about grabbing my arm. Felipe started saying it wasn't that hard and I was being dramatic, but the judge cut him off. She asked if he grabbed me or not, and Felipe mumbled that maybe he did but only because I was ignoring him. The judge looked at him over her glasses for a long moment then started writing. She extended the protective order for 6 months and made it clear Felipe couldn't contact me at all. No texts or calls or messages through other people or showing up where I lived or worked. She told us both to get counseling and said if Felipe broke the order even once, he'd be arrested immediately. Felipe's face turned red and his lawyer started to argue, but the judge was already calling the next case. I walked out past Felipe without looking at him and drove straight to Audrey's apartment. The next week, Allison called again with the final HR decision about Felipe's job. They weren't firing him, but he had to complete anger management counseling before coming back to work. He got a final warning in his file, and they were moving him to a different department with no client contact. His new job would be data entry in the basement with no chance of promotion for at least a year. She said they took workplace safety seriously and thanked me for my cooperation with their investigation. After the hearing, Felipe's family had different reactions that trickled back to me through mutual friends. His mom started texting me these long messages about how she was praying for both of us. She said she knew her son had problems and hoped I could forgive him someday, but understood if I couldn't. Meanwhile, his sister kept posting stuff on social media about gold diggers and liars without using my name. She finally stopped when someone commented that Felipe admitted to everything in court. The family started using Felipe's cousin as a go-between for anything involving shared bills or mail that needed forwarding. Moving day came 2 weeks after I signed the lease on the studio apartment. Audrey helped me carry boxes up the narrow stairs while the bakery owner gave us free coffee. I'd bought a bed and dresser from a thrift store and found a small table at a garage sale. The couch was actually decent considering someone left it on the curb with a free sign. Everything was cheap and mismatched, but it was mine, and Felipe had never touched any of it. That first night, I made pasta on my tiny stove and ate it sitting on the floor. I could hear people walking on the sidewalk below and smell bread from the bakery starting their overnight baking. I actually slept the whole night without waking up scared or checking the locks 5 times. 3 days after I moved in, I got a Facebook message from one of Felipe's friends saying Felipe wanted to know if I was okay. The message said Felipe was worried about me and just wanted to make sure I had somewhere safe to live. I took a screenshot and sent it to Officer McCarty, who called me back within an hour. He said it was definitely Felipe trying to get around the protective order, but technically his friend sent it, not him. He documented everything in case Felipe tried something else but couldn't arrest him for what his friend did. I blocked the friend and made all my social media accounts private. The next week, I went to the courthouse again to file small claims paperwork for my half of our apartment deposit. I also wanted money back for the utilities I'd paid in advance and my portion of the furniture we'd bought together. The total was only about $800, but I wanted every official tie to Felipe cut completely. The clerk said Felipe would get served with the papers and we'd have a mediation date in about a month. Chuck called me 3 weeks later saying the garage was finally cleared out and safe again. He'd brought in a whole crew to haul away those old paint cans and rusted chemicals, and they found even worse stuff behind the shelves, like old pesticides from the 70s that needed special handling. The landlord sent me a check for $400, which wasn't much, but covered part of my security deposit on the new place. My first therapy appointment came the next week through work's mental health program. I sat in the waiting room filling out forms about my sleep patterns and stress levels while other people came and went. The therapist was this older woman who listened while I talked about everything that happened, and she helped me see how the silent treatment started as protection but turned into something else. She said there's a difference between setting boundaries and using silence as a weapon, which made sense even though it was hard to hear. Felipe's lawyer sent a letter 2 weeks later with this formal apology that sounded nothing like him. My therapist read it during our session, and we talked about whether I needed to respond or even read it myself. We decided together that engaging with it wouldn't help my healing. So, she kept the letter in my file in case I ever wanted it later. The small claims mediation happened exactly a month after I filed the paperwork. We sat in separate rooms while the mediator went back and forth trying to work out an agreement. Felipe agreed to pay me $400 of the $800 I asked for, which wasn't everything, but meant I could close that chapter. We both signed papers saying we wouldn't contact each other except through lawyers if needed. 3 weeks into therapy, I was getting better at talking again, but in healthier ways. Instead of going silent or talking nonstop to fill space, I was learning to say what I actually meant. My therapist had me practice phrases like, "I need time to think about that," instead of either shutting down or agreeing to things I didn't want. The progress felt slow, but every week got a little easier. My days settled into this new pattern of going to work, seeing my therapist on Wednesdays, and slowly reconnecting with friends. Some people at work had heard about the whole silent treatment thing and thought I was crazy, but Audrey and a few others understood that sometimes you do what you have to do to survive. I started having coffee with a coworker who went through her own bad breakup, and we'd sit in the break room comparing notes on starting over. Felipe finished his mandatory counseling after 2 months, according to what I heard through mutual friends. He was back at work in some different role where he didn't deal with clients anymore. Someone told me he was already dating this girl from his gym, and I felt bad for her but knew warning her would just drag me back into his mess. 2 months after that shelf fell in the garage, I was actually doing okay. My studio apartment had plants on the windowsill and pictures on the walls, and I'd painted one wall this soft blue color that made the place feel bigger. I was sleeping through the night without checking the locks constantly, eating regular meals instead of stress snacking, and could walk past places Felipe and I used to go without my chest getting tight. My voice was back, but different now, stronger and clearer about what I wanted and didn't want. The protective order was still in place for 4 more months, but I rarely thought about it anymore. Work was going well since I could focus without all the drama, and my boss mentioned a possible promotion coming up. I joined a book club through the library and actually spoke up during discussions instead of just nodding along. My therapist said I was making real progress in understanding my patterns and breaking the cycles that led me to someone like Felipe in the first place. The money from the settlement and mediation helped me buy some actual furniture instead of just thrift store stuff, including this reading chair that became my favorite spot in the apartment. I could hear the bakery downstairs starting their morning prep at 4 a.m., but it had become comforting background noise instead of annoying. Friends started inviting me to things again once they saw I was stable and not going to bring drama to every gathering. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was learning that was enough.
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.